5th, 2020 COVID-19 clinical rounds, emergency department. These rounds are focused on physician suicide during the pandemic. My name is Richard Hunt. I'm an emergency physician who serves as senior medical advisor at the National Healthcare Preparedness Programs in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response at the United States Department of Health and Human Services. The purpose of these rounds are peer-to-peer real-time sharing of COVID-19 challenges and successes. The clinicians I want to learn from are those clinicians with the most experience. This is a voluntary public-private collaboration. Thanks to the multiple professional organizations who have collaborated on these rounds. They are not intended to be redundant or replace any organization's initiatives. They are intended to be sharing of clinical experience rather than recommendations or guidance. These ECHO clinical rounds you are now participating in are focused on clinicians sharing their successes and challenges with other clinicians. Thanks to the National Emerging Special Pathogen Training and Education Center, NETEC, for their support with these rounds. NETEC has webinars that complement these Project ECHO COVID-19 clinical rounds. Thanks to Project ECHO, Dr. Bruce Struminger and his team for the peer-to-peer learning platform we use for these rounds. Upcoming ECHO COVID-19 clinical rounds currently are all US noon Eastern time. On Monday, November 9th will be EMS rounds focused on rural EMS successes and challenges, featuring a speaker from rural Montana. On Tuesday, November 10th will be critical care rounds focused on crisis care, featuring a speaker from Utah. On Thursday, November 12th, will be emergency department rounds, focused on understanding our international emergency medicine colleagues' successes and challenges with the pandemic, with our speaker being the professor and head of emergency medicine at the All India Institute for Medical Sciences in New Delhi. Stay tuned for announcements for future rounds. It is self-evident that our nation's medical response challenges continue to change every day. We'll continue to work here to identify topics for these peer-to-peer learning rounds that are most timely and helpful to clinicians. Dr. Bruce Struminger will now go over some logistics.
Thank you, Rick, and special thank you to Dr. Carol Cunningham, who has been along with us on this clinical care rounds journey pretty much since the beginning, who will be presenting to us today on this critical topic of the issue of physician suicide in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to share some housekeeping slides and just some reminders. As always, we really appreciate comments and questions from all of our participants, and please put those in the Q&A feature on the bottom right of the Zoom toolbar. Also, if you have any technical or logistic questions, please put those in the chat feature. We'll be monitoring both of those. We are recording this session, and your attendance is consent to be recorded. Thank you for that. Today's presentation and the recording will be shared through our Project ECHO Clinical Care Rounds website. And I think Amanda's already shared a link to that with you. That includes an archive of all the PowerPoint presentations and recordings since March. And please check that out. For those who would like CME and continuing professional development credits, we're offering those through the University of New Mexico, where Project ECHO is based. About 15 minutes before the end of the session, we'll share a link in the chat for you to complete a short questionnaire. We really value your feedback on these clinical rounds. It's how we, it's what guides us as we move forward and plan future sessions. So please take advantage of that opportunity and share your feedback with us. Just as a reminder, these learning sessions are focused on improving patient care in health systems and supporting clinicians. Please let's keep them apolitical and non-commercial. Thank you for that. Just a word about data use. Just want to remind everyone that we take data stewardship very seriously. Most of the data you share is de-identified. What identified data you do share when you register, we keep secure and confidential. And the only data that we share with Rick and Asper is all de-identified. Just want to give everyone a reminder about our partnership with NETEC, the National Emerging Special Pathogen Training and Education Center. As Rick mentioned, they're a partner in these clinical rounds. They have their own webinar series that complements the clinical round series in many respects. They have a session tomorrow on care transitions to home health, and they archive recordings of all their sessions since March as well. So we recommend that you check that out. And with that, I'd like to hand over the microphone to Dr. Rosha McCoy with the AAMC to give us an update on the clinical guidance repository. Rosha.
Thank you, Bruce. Yes, so just to remind everyone of this resource from the Association of American Medical Colleges, the Coronavirus Clinical Guidance Repository. We started this back in April and have continued as an open access resource for all clinicians and hospitals around the country and the world if needed. The content is from academic medical centers, specialty societies, and federal partners. And we've been identifying, summarizing, and highlighting areas of alignment in clinical practice. We just updated again today, continuing to try to stay up to date with the changing guidelines or guidance. So I hope this is useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosha. And Rick, back to you for the crowdsourcing question.
Thanks, Bruce. This question's simple, and it would be great to have an answer to this one. What can we do to prevent physician suicides during the pandemic? And realizing that we have many on the rounds who, we have broad range of disciplines, specialties. So if there are EMS clinicians, nurses, respiratory therapists, and so forth, if you can speak to maybe to your discipline or specialty in response to that, that would be great as well. I want to go around and have each of the panelists please go off mute and introduce yourselves before I introduce our speaker. Dr. Thompson.
Hi, I'm Dave Thompson. I'm a clinical professor of emergency medicine at East Carolina University and medical director for Vidant East Care.
Thanks, Dave. Harry?
Excuse me. Hi, I'm Harry Seibold. I'm an EMS and EM physician in Helena, Montana, and sit on air medical committees for NAMSP and ACEP. Thank you.
Dave Gerstner.
David Gerstner with Dayton Fire Department in Dayton, Ohio, and I'm the regional MMRS coordinator for multiple counties of West Central Ohio.
Thanks. Sandy?
Sandy Schneider, Associate Executive Director for Clinical Affairs at the American College of Emergency Physicians and also an emergency physician.
Thanks. Dan?
Dan Gerard, President-elect of the International Association of EMS Chiefs and EMS Coordinator for the City of Alameda Fire.
Thanks all for joining us. And off the top is introduce our speaker. At least in my experience clinically, physician suicide is maybe the hardest topic to talk about. And yet, based on the discussion, the chat, the QAs that have been in the rounds, not long after we started, around the challenges around mental health support for clinicians, fatigue, complacency, and on, physician deaths, and suicide, to not talk about it just seems wrong, and not just seems wrong, but potentially is our own denial. So with that, it's been quite a challenge to try to figure out how to address this on the rounds. And deeply grateful to our speaker today to tackle this head on. Dr. Carol Cunningham, who has been no stranger to the rounds, but a real active contributor over many months. Dr. Cunningham is State Medical Director for the Ohio Department of Public Safety Division of EMS, and also notably an emergency physician. Carol, please turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about a subject that makes us all uncomfortable, should make us all uncomfortable, but we can really not stay silent. First and foremost, I'm speaking from my heart today as Carol. I'm not representing anything. I'm not representing the state or the hospital where I work. For those people who are not on the, haven't been on the EMS rounds, just as a background, I was first presenting when I was a patient on that side in a rehab unit of recovering from surgery. And I wrote an article then called The Human Side of Us that was published in GEMS on Easter Sunday. And it was really an outpouring of how I felt when I found out that the first death in my county was actually one of my EMS providers and actually a friend. And when I wrote it, some of the lines in that, as I reread it now, it's pretty shocking how some of those have come true. I'll have a link later on for those folks who haven't read the article, but if you Google The Human Side of Us in Cunningham and GEMS, you'll see it. The past 2 weeks have been pretty tough. I've always been part of this buddy system forever for friends. I'll do anything for a friend. I'm a people person first, and people know they can come to me and tell me any problem, and I can help them out and never say a word about it. I've actually kind of gotten a nickname in the sense, so they call me Sister Carol because I'm like a nun. Over the past 2 weeks, I've had a couple providers, again, whether it's due to burnout or whatever, come to me and just want to talk. And just two, really, like I said, in the past 2 weeks. I got a call from a long-term friend of mine who, again, just wanted to talk, sounded stressed out. I was leaving a meeting, and it took me about an hour and a half I said, let's just get together. So it's like an hour and a half drive. And as I was driving, I was on the freeway, and I saw what looked like his car on the side of the road. And I drove a little bit more, and I saw him standing on a bridge over a freeway, on an overpass. And I put I pulled off the side, put my hazard lights on, and he was getting ready to jump. I walked up next to him, I held his hand, and just stood there looking over the bridge with him. And when he turned around to look at me, it was like there was nobody home. Hollow eyes, just not a soul there. And I didn't say anything for a while other than holding his hand. I said, I'm here. And then he looked, there was a tear coming down his eye, and I gradually got him into my car. Took him to, actually ultimately got him admitted to a psychiatric ward. But, he was, and now, I mean, he's better now, but when I talked to him, I said, I was coming. He goes, I know that, but I just felt like I was bothering you. And you just didn't need to hear about my problems anymore. And it really kind of highlights the challenges that we all have. But I was together until I got home, and then I realized, what if I had been 5 minutes later? What would have happened? It just, it was scary. Then probably 4 days later, I was working in our emergency department, and it was packed, and we were holding patients. We run out of ICU beds, and I had spoken to hospital administration about a legitimate, what we were going to do about planning. And it wasn't a malicious comment, but it really stuck with me. Where the hospital administrator just said, well, it's going to be like this for a while, so you just got to get used to it. The next day, when I went in, I was working a day shift where I was going to head to Columbus to speak at a meeting the next day. And an hour before I left, I got an email that really took me down. And it was an email informing me that one of the people that I trained with that I never ever would have dreamed would have cracked this under pressure, but had committed suicide. I lost it. They actually brought in somebody to relieve me early, and I still went to Columbus, but it really took me down to the floor. And as I was driving, I just thought, you know, again, over decades, I've helped friends out, but in a matter of less than 2 weeks, I had 4 friends who were near the point of cracking. So, you know, when you listen to the resources we have, and you know, organizations have come out with great suggestions, but to me, we really, really need to, you know, change the culture of all this. So I'm going to pull up slides here to go over, because I think we really need to start by within our own within us as emergency and healthcare providers, to have our own conversation and get a solution for the long term here. Let me just share my screen here. Actually, I think I did this wrong. 2 seconds. Share. Here we go back. All right.
Looks great, Carol.
Okay, good. So, you know, prior to the pandemic, our suicide rates, not only for physicians, but for EMS provider, anybody in our field, have been higher than usual. But we really are in the COVID world, we're recording COVID positive deaths, but not any record of deaths where COVID stress has contributed. So we have a lot of people who I consider suffering in silence. As I referenced, you know, I go back to reading this article. These are, you know, 2 sentences that really stood out to me that were in the article, where I predicted that, you know, the concern, everybody back then, when things were shutting down, were concerned about the economic effect of the pandemic. I was actually more concerned about the psychological impact. And this was, again, in April, where we didn't realize that here we are close to 2021, and this is ongoing. And, you know, I referenced the fact that we have a healthcare force, most of which have been involved in and trained in a civilian setting, where when you look at some of the things that happen in New York, it's really like a military setting where people are just dying around you every single day. You go in every single day and you're working overtime. So that, you know, there'll be, you know, past the pandemic, we will have people who shouldn't be practicing because of the stress, will voluntarily leave, be left with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I said, in the worst case, suicide. And I remember writing that that sentence thinking, wow, is that a little strong? But I'm like, no, you know, this could actually happen, not realizing it would really happen in my own circle of friends. You know, when I was talking to Rick about this, I responded to him. I said, you know, we're really in the middle of a Bermuda Triangle, and when I see a tsunami's approaching, you know, the infection rates are going up. Excuse me a second. The infection rates are going up, and we have a lot of people out there that don't even realize the impact that has happened to them. Social distancing and isolation. It's great to have a buddy system, but how do you have a buddy when you're supposed to social distance? I'm a pretty resilient person, but I was laughing with some folks who are in my situation where you're single and you live by yourself. Well, you know, you go home, most people go home to people in the house. Some people don't. And we were joking, saying that, gosh, you hear a human voice and you want to jump down like somebody shot off a bullet in your house, because it's so shocking to hear a human voice. The stress and work fatigue is escalating. Look at what's happened to the emergency medicine community, where because of hospital closures, people are getting furloughed, they're getting laid off, contracts are being canceled. I spoke with one of my colleagues who works in New York, and for those of us who are old salty sailors, he said, I feel like a Vietnam vet. I fought the war, I went in with PPE, I maybe didn't have enough supplies, but I still fought the battle for my patients. And here's the thanks that I get. My hours are cut in half. My hospital's closed, I no longer have a job. And then lastly, every day we go in, there's a risk of infection and the fear of taking it back to your family and friends. The last shift I worked, the guy that I relieved, in a joking way, he said, gosh, we should do a study and see how many days can a person take a boiling hot shower when they go home from work without burning up. So all these factors really come into a dangerous or potentially dangerous Bermuda Triangle that we still need to address, and address long after this pandemic is over. Physicians are different in terms for several reasons. Number one, mental illness is still not considered, as you well know, an acceptable disease. Stress is not considered a disease like diabetes, whatever. Society has that, but we also have that stigma in the emergency medicine community, just within ourselves. And I think people want to hide their cracks because they don't want to have the appearance of being a weak physician. And when I say access to healthcare is limited, first of all, how do you schedule an appointment to see your doctor when you're working overtime to cover for people? How do you do that? How do you take care of yourself without taking a day off to say, hey, I've got to go to a therapy session or whatever? And maintenance of privacy, and that kind of pairs with the stigma of illness. You'll hear people say, gosh, I'm feeling pretty good. We went out, we had some bourbon last night, came back to work. You never hear anybody, in the 30 years, I've never heard anybody say, hey, my doctor doubled the dose of Zoloft and I feel great now. They'll never admit that. And it's not like that just with depression. It's anything that is considered, it's hard. You maintain privacy in it. And I refer to the movie in 2003, Something's Gotta Give. I mean, Jack Nicholson was having a heart attack, and the nitroglycerin in his IV was literally inches away from going to his vein before he admitted that he was on Viagra. You don't hear any ER doc talk about that. They don't want everybody else to know that they're taking that medication. And then there's the stoicism. And I've talked to a lot of folks, and including lay people, getting medication to help somebody through a bad patch. They don't want to accept it. They feel like, oh gosh, they're crazy. I'll have to be on this all my life. But an emergency physician, because we see things that people aren't supposed to see, and we go on. So in a way, we are like trained to be the masters of disguise. And when you talk to some colleagues that they're having a bad day, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to somebody and I can sense when they're not having when they're not right. I've had at least 6 docs I've gone to, well, what's bothering you? And then they'll tell me something like, well, my mother's dying. And I was like, well, why are you here? Well, if I leave, they think I'm weak. If I call somebody in, I think I'm weak. I'm like, just tell me about your cases and get out of here. There's always going to be another shift. You only got one mother. You need to be there to hold her hand. The buddy system is great, but again, we have people who are so skilled at being the master of disguise. And I guess the best comparison I can have, you know, the aortic dissection where you have ripping chest pain and you're really hurting, those are really easy to pick up. But think about the cases you've caught where I just don't feel right or have a little bit of chest pain, and you get a CAT scan looking for a pulmonary embolism or something else, and ooh, you got lucky, you found the early aortic dissection. Those are the ones that you know, we can't catch all of them, but I think we can catch more of those cases where someone's feeling suicidal or has such a shield up against them that you don't recognize some of those signs because they become a master disguise. So, you know, I'd like to get the conversation started. To me personally, I think there actually needs to be a change in the culture among us. You know, we focus on, you know, infections and depression and suicide, but inherently we as people need to work on ourselves and also incorporate that in the training of our residents and our medical students. I went to the University of Cincinnati for med school, and I think Dave did too. I don't know if they had this when you were there, but I remember my first year as a medical student, we were required to, as part of our patient engagement, to actually meet with somebody in the psychiatry department and actually go through a therapy session ourselves. And I thought, this is nuts. But in actuality, I think everybody in our class learned a little bit about ourselves. Nobody's normal. I kind of know what my psychiatric diagnosis is. You know, I'm a gammophobic arctophilus. So I'll give a prize to whoever figures that out. I'll tell you at the end, but I'm an incurable gammophobic arctophilus. So, you know, we need to really eliminate this, you know, buck up and take it kind of attitude where, you know, we're superheroes. We're the ones that fly in. And certainly as emergency physicians, we're adrenaline junkies. We have to have that. We thrive on it. But we come in and save the day, but it doesn't always work out to a victory. Years and years of taking those kind of hits. The other thing is, I think we still need to actively infuse an element of humanity into our clinical practice. And I always tell my residents, I don't care if they have stinky feet or cussing at you or whatever, everybody is somebody's baby. And just like all I did was hold my friend's hand as we were standing on a bridge with freight trucks going by. That's what he needed to connect back. And that's even tougher now with social distancing. Telemedicine is going to change our practice, but it will still not replace that human touch. And I hope we don't lose that. Technology is great that we have, but again, it'll never be a substitute for doing a good physical exam or calming down a patient. And then lastly, you know, we need to go back and what I call embrace and nurture the original equipment in your life. And when I say be a person first and be a person last, I'm passionate about emergency medicine. I love it, but you know, that's what I do. That's my profession. It's not me as a person. You only spend a third of your life at work. At the end of the day, or the beginning of the day, I'm Carol. At the end of the day, you know, I'm Carol. I'm a blue collar kid from Maple Heights, Ohio. I don't need I know when I did my first presentation, John Kramer asked me, when you went to the rehab center, did you tell him you were the state medical director? I was like, absolutely not. Which kind of took me back, but then I never introduced myself as a physician. I'm Carol. If I'm in a patient care scenario, I am. And I remember I'm on the board of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and you know, because I work in the music industry, and it wasn't until they went into a room and opened up my CV that was like the first time a lot of people realized I was a physician, and now they know why I'm not really available for every gig, and they were kind of shocked. I said it's frightening. But having said that, yeah, we're heroes, but Superman, think about Superman. Superman didn't spend his whole life being Superman. Most of his life, he was Clark Kent, this nerdy guy that nobody, just went through life like a normal person. Same thing. If you're more high end, you're a Batman. You come out and you're Bruce Wayne, this Playboy millionaire lives a weird life in a mansion, but you're not Batman all day long. So, life is precious. It's yet so fragile. I think when I think back on this pandemic, I always said that, somebody asked me, what's your hardest day? And I still think, and part of it was the situation I was in, when you're a rehab center, I had no contact with friends or family for 41 days. And I was looking at the data, and as in my role as state medical director, and I saw that hatch mark come up for Lake County. It was a piece of data. But the minute I found out that it was my friend, that will drop you when it transforms into someone else, someone that you love, someone who gave so much to the community. It changes the script. And I'm sorry. And then when I think about when I found out that my colleague had committed suicide, and again, the comment wasn't malicious, but I go back, it just rung in my head what that administrator said to me was, it's going to be like this for a while. Get used to it. We cannot get used to this. We should not get used to this. This cannot be our new normal. So with that, thank you very much, Rick. I tried to get through it without crying, but it is what it is. Thank you.
Hey, Carol, I think the crying part's like, thanks for being human. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for showing us the way, actually. I mean that sincerely. Let's give Carol a little bit of a break for some tears and comments from any of the panelists. And then I've got some questions for you, Carol.
Okay. I'm good.
Take a breath. Sandy.
Thank you, Carol. I mean, that statement, the fact that you're a human being, is something that we all need. During the ACEP meeting last week, we had a presentation of Theater of War, and we had a panel afterwards. And I knew not everyone, but I knew most of those people. And for me, it was one of the very few times I saw them as being human. They let their guts hang out in a way that we never do. And some of these people were people I knew extremely well. And they all had pain inside, and we all do. So thank you. And then to Rick and to the others, what I'm struggling with now is, how do we get this pain out? Because that's the only way you heal, is you just keep, as emergency physicians, we just keep smashing it down. And when people said things that night, little pieces came up, and I was like, smash, 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 to get it back down. You can't deal with that. But we have to go through that to heal. And so how do we do that? And in what way can we do that? We can't do it when we're in person. And so Zooming sounds even worse, but somehow we got to let us be human beings. One quick story. I had a journalist that followed me around for a night, and she was supposed to be doing a story. I don't even remember what it was. And she looked at me about an hour into it. She goes, "Oh my God, you're human beings. You were just talking about like what you were cooking for dinner, and you have kids. I just never thought that you, as an emergency doc, would like have a life." And it was very funny. It was very revealing. So that not only do we do this, but in large ways, society does this as well. They make us not human.
Thanks, Sandy. Rosha.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carol. I was, our daughter is a first-year medical student, and her white coat ceremony, I was very happy to hear a lot of focus on this issue. And the speaker was a family practice doc who spoke about the fact that one of the reasons folks who go into these fields are so good at what we do is partly because is also what puts us at risk. We're kind of overly compulsive at times. It's good to have some anxiety because you're dealing with people's lives, but that anxiety can get overwhelming. And the physician who spoke about how he had been in therapy and that he had found that helpful. And it's actually, openly sharing. And I think that was very insightful. I didn't have that. I also attended the University of Cincinnati Medical School. And I don't remember anybody ever bringing any of that kind of thing up. And even in residency, even in pediatrics, I remember dealing with patients dying and nobody, a whole shift of multiple patient deaths and nobody really sitting with me to say, how did you deal with that? That was difficult. As a young person, there was really like no support for that. And just everybody was expected to just keep going. And I think all of us maybe stepping back, just like Carol said, and making sure we're taking care of each other is really, really important. And being open about the fact that we often need help and we need to make sure we get it.
Thanks, Rosha. I want to also have others comment, but I picking up on both Sandy and Rosha's comments. What, in particular, Sandy, I listened to your invitation to the Greek tragedy performances that ACEP put on, and I struggled with the same thing as well. With how is it that we can best take care of ourselves given all these circumstances? And I am grasping at straws with that, and part of what I've been informed by is basically you on the rounds. I'm not just talking about participants or not just the speakers or panelists, but the participants in the chat and so forth, and this huge challenge we have in the worst disaster in a century with us trying to figure out how to help ourselves. And it's not at all clear to me that an individual can manage all the financial issues, the moral injury, the fatigue by themselves. Clearly, some are doing that. I mean, that's pretty clear. And then, okay, for example, Sandy, and thanks for the free. One of the things I reflect on quite a bit, and I've talked about this internally with HHS, Jolyon McGreevy from Mount Sinai, and this is when I first sort of really became aware of the challenges we were going to face. When I said, well, things are really stressful in New York City. This was way back in April. And he said, yeah, I mean, we're going down, basically. Not so many words, but, and we embedded psychiatrists or psych professional help for our clinicians in the emergency department. And then a month later, I had him come back and I said, how was that working? Because I thought it was like a masterful, if I had been chair, why didn't I think of that? And he said, didn't work at all. It was the worst thing ever. and it didn't work. And so we moved over to this buddy system. And I said, how's that working? I don't know, but we're going to change if that doesn't work out. From what we see in the chat, what we've seen in the polling and so forth, the buddy system, that sort of trend, we've moved in to where it seems like people, again, based on polling that we've done here, I don't have any science behind it, that is actually, the buddy system seems to be taking hold in a positive way. And how many years of multidisciplinary trials is it going to take to sort that out? And we have an emergency right now. We have an emergency. So it's like SGBD, something's got to be done. And so people are implementing the buddy system. And I'm not like the promulgator of it. It's not an advertisement. I'm just grasping at straws to try to figure out how we can help each other best. And there's the whole dynamic. And Carol and I, it was a great email conversation that we had after I invited her to do this, talked about, well, okay, there's the opportunity to bring in, professional psychiatry, emergency psychiatry and so forth into these rounds. And we talked about that and decided, let's get our arms around this among the physicians that are not psychiatry first, and then maybe figure out how to bring them into that conversation, not as like a firewall and a standoff, like, well, they don't know what they're doing, or maybe they know what they're doing, we got to figure out that secret. But it's clear to me, at least based on my experience with clinicians and faculty members, you bring in that dimension and some absolutely run and shut down, as opposed to, yep, I'm going to seek help. So then you think about like all those CIA movies. No, I never did the CIA, but you see those CIA movies where they're commanded to go see psychiatry, just like Carol, you were talking about Cincinnati, you got to go see psychiatry. And is that, so I think this is a huge, huge challenge that we're all facing, trying to figure out what is the answer to this. And these rounds, at least hopefully, can help us point in, at least into some experiments that actually might work out. So anyway.
Rick, can I interject there one for a second?
Yeah, please, Carol, come back.
One of the challenges though is, you know, you might go to your own hospital if you got bronchitis, but how do you maintain somebody's confidentiality because of the stigma into someone who needs to be admitted? You know, once I got this guy in my car, I couldn't go to the closest place, didn't want to go to any network where, you know, he wanted, you know, just to protect him, not know that he was being admitted. And a separate case, which was 20 years ago, and my friend and I joke around, we drove over 2 state lines. I drove him over, you know, two state lines to get him to a facility where he felt comfortable, where his privacy would be protected. And I'm willing to do that for any friend, but that is a challenge unique to us because, you know, a lot of times the repercussions you get are from the people in your group and
Absolutely.
the that they feel. So it's an additional hurdle.
Yeah. But I think, you know, we need to, I mean, it would be far easier to not talk about this, easier, but I don't think that's the answer. I just don't think that's the answer. Sandy, you have a comment now? Sure.
Yeah, we're really talking about 2 very different things. We're talking about coping with this crisis, which is not a psychiatric disease, which does not require a psychiatrist. And in fact, my friend who is the head of the American Association for Emergency Psychiatry basically said, don't put psychiatrists with emergency docs. They have no idea what they're doing. They'll be sitting there looking for psychosis and talking about, you know, are you afraid to get on an airplane? He said, what you're going through is normal. What you need, he suggested at that point, the buddy system. I'm going to comment on something else. But then you have the person who really needs care, like Carol's mentioning. And I think all of us have, you know, experiences where we've had to refer our colleagues. And that has to do more with stigma and the whole thing around the state boards. And we're trying to work on that. But I think beyond the buddy system, and I think the buddy system is the best thing that we have right now. I was intrigued, someone wrote in the chat, I don't know who you are. I guess I could find it. But you talked about virtual grand rounds to just sort of get it out. And I wrote that down as something that I'm going to take back to ACEP, because I think after Theater of War, that was kind of like what that was. And, you know, if it's helpful to me, I assume it's going to be helpful to everybody else. But I think something like that, or sort of a virtual buddy system, maybe that. I'm guys in the chat, I'm really looking for, I'm struggling of what ACEP can do. And I'd really love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, and Sandy, yeah, and Dave, I saw your hand up. I'm going to go to you next, but Bruce and I, you know, the only way I can keep up is with Bruce helping me keep up, and he noted how really thoughtful the chat has been. Participants have really like stepped up and made some really insightful comments, and want to acknowledge that. Dave.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happens is we oftentimes feel like this anxiety, depression, whatever you want to call it, these feelings that we have are somehow catching. And if one of our colleagues has admitted that they need help, it's like, oh my goodness, I might catch the same problem. And we've got to admit that we all are experiencing this, and that it is not something where if one of our colleagues seeks help, it's some kind of epidemic problem. Each one of us has to realize that it is just that person needs help. I may need help the next time. And it's not something where we should say, we should view it as a threat to ourselves. But I think oftentimes we do.
Thanks, Dave. Jennifer Simmons, I see you down there. If you got a comment, like go off mute so I can, Jennifer was a wonderful contributor to one of our previous rounds. I want to make sure if she's got a comment that wow, live and in concert. Wow, great, awesome. Jennifer, any comments or questions? I just, Jennifer, there you are.
We deal with, or we are attempting to figure out how to deal with wildland firefighter suicides. There's a lot of different pieces that pop into my head. After a wildfire shift, they do an AAR, an after action review. They get together and talk about what went well, what didn't go well, that kind of thing. And you can somewhat tweak that to be a discussion of your crew for the shift. I know everyone wants to get out of the hospital after their shift is done, but if you took just 10 minutes after the shift to talk about what happened today, what were you feeling, and putting words to those feelings and emotions. Right now, trying to, again, deal with the suicide issue in wildland fire, I'm reading several different books on stress and PTSD and everything else. And it talks about how when, as ER docs, as EMS personnel, we push all those feelings down and we change over to that depersonalization type of person, where then you don't correlate that gut visceral feeling that you have to that emotion. And then that becomes dissociated. And so voicing those emotions that you're feeling and how that feeling is, what that emotion feeling is, that you were scared to death, that pit in your stomach, that whatever, but just talking about it and recognizing that other people have those same feelings and emotions, it can be very therapeutic for the people listening to what other people are feeling.
Yeah, Jennifer, I just sort of like my own reaction to that. I think it's really some special comments in that, reflecting back to my own shifts, like all of us, we had some great ones and some brutal ones. But when I joined the nurses for breakfast after that brutal night in July or August, it was 100 degrees and it was the Knife and Gun Club. That was probably it was much healthier in retrospect than going home and totally shutting it away and having those mechanisms to make, totally divorce yourself from it. So I see it's almost like that debrief thing, but not in like, we're going to have a PTSD debrief, which at least in my experience with emergency physicians is doesn't work out so well. That, again, one person's experience, but I haven't seen that. Dan, I want to turn it over to Dan and Dave, but I want to make a comment, particularly given your EMS breadth of experience, expertise. One of the things, I actually had thought about with these rounds, realizing people did want a forum to talk about this, was to do a grand round special session with all the disciplines. Thought about that quite a bit. And John Kramer, who moderates half of the EMS sessions with me, we talked about that a little bit. And there's certainly value to that, but also there's absolutely we all are clinicians, yet there are absolute nuances with a culture of EMS, a culture in nursing, a culture in physicians. Now, can we all benefit from each other? And a culture of psychiatry and psychology. Can we all benefit that? And indeed, as Sandy pointed out, and I have mentioned this at HHS multiple times, because we have done cross disciplines, that actually has been an unintended consequences in a most positive way. We probably need to do that, but this is like, we're stepping into this, okay? So bear with me. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, particularly Dan and Dave, about the EMS piece briefly, because we don't have a whole lot of time. So Dan and then Dave.
You know, I would say when we looked at incidents like World Trade Center and Katrina, it was easy at a certain point for providers to kind of step back and let them go someplace where they can decompress. And unfortunately with COVID, you know, we're not afforded that. COVID is everywhere. And there's really not an opportunity for us to shut down. I think that as EMS providers, we're poor arbiters of our own well-being, and we need that outside. We need that battle buddy person. You know, I'm looking out for you, you're looking out for me, and that's, you know, key for our path forward. You know, if you're going to try to institute some type of measures of care now, I think Sandy brought it up earlier before, now is not the time to start taking a yoga class, or, you know, that, you know, that's for like when we get past this, you know, when we start talking about wellness. But I think the one thing that I want to leave you with is that we are at the tip of the iceberg, and that we are going to feel the impacts of this both physically and mentally for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Because even now, 20 years after September 11th, we still have members, you know, whether they're public safety, whether they're EMS, hospital, etc., we still have people that are unfortunately committing suicide, that struggle with addiction problems, that struggle with mental health problems. So this COVID isn't over as long as somebody is suffering.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. Dave Gerstner.
So probably everybody on this call is aware, but suicides exceed line of duty deaths for both firefighters and police officers, and probably for EMS personnel as well. We don't have statistics, and Dan's well aware that we really don't have good statistics for EMS personnel in terms of all kinds of things, line of duty injuries, line of duty deaths, lots of things that not nearly as good as what we have for police and fire. At the same time, we probably are grossly underestimating the number of suicides for all three public safety disciplines, that it's not well reported. We've had multiple suicides in my region in fire, EMS, and law enforcement agencies. We've had one in my agency. This is an ongoing challenge. Dan's points are really right on point, but something that that Jennifer said, when I came on as a rookie, which was a long damn time ago, people from the fire station would leave after a 24-hour shift at 7 o'clock in the morning and go to a bar. And I did that one time, and my father was an alcoholic, and that was a trend that I didn't want to continue, and my stomach really didn't care much for the idea of drinking at 7 a.m. either. But I wonder now if in some ways that was a little bit healthy, because it did provide kind of some of that decompression in a completely unhealthy atmosphere. But it's an interesting point. I don't have any good answers, but it is a problem, and it was noted in the chat that this really is unrecognized how bad it is in a lot of different professions. And I'd also like to say I had a discussion earlier this morning about we do a quarterly triage day normally to exercise everybody's skills for mass casualties. And we have stopped doing those during COVID because they are stressful for personnel, and our people are stressed out, and it's not just the on-the-job stress. This is all pervasive. And so everybody lives with the stress of COVID from the time they wake up until the time they go to bed, and maybe while you're sleeping. And we can't figure out how to do some of the trainings to keep this stuff current without further burdening people. And so we're trying to work through that very narrowly, but it really does relate to the overall topic of this conversation. So Carol, who I've known for, I don't know how many years, but a long time. Forever, yes. Thank you for sharing that. And Rick, thanks for doing this. This is very important. I'd also, one last thing, I'd like to encourage anybody who's on this who didn't watch the presentation about death of a clinician that Dr. Kelly Eimer did, to watch that as well. We are stressed watching our coworkers be sick, and that hurts too. And she was just magnificent.
Thanks, Dave. I'm going to make a really quick announcement here. Before I went, Dave, one of the things I actually struggle with in terms of trying to balance the rounds, like I've said, it would have been far easier to not do this one, or the death of a clinician with Dr. Kelly Eimer. Much easier, guarantee you. And there's a part of me, the human part, that says, why bring this up at all and inflict more pain? And yet, at this juncture, to me, actually on my experience leading the Department of Emergency Medicine, talking about stuff, I recall when we had an alcoholic that came back after recovery and decided we needed to talk about that. It was healthier. And so I'm going with that. And if the chat says, and the QAs and the polling says, I got it wrong, let me know. But I think at least at this juncture, we probably need to keep talking about it. So a quick announcement, and then I'm going to go around really quickly to each. When I say quickly, any salient comments before I turn it over to Carol. And Carol, I have one question for you, and then you get the last word. So the announcement, we, for some time, probably 3 months or so, we have wanted to do a pulse check on like the so what, do these rounds make any difference at all? And obviously, and as I said on the last rounds, it's not for my teaching portfolio, guarantee you. Law, that's train left the station a long time ago. But it really is important, you know, if we invest in this, you invest in your time, and we invest at HHS, and ECHO does as well, doesn't make any difference. So we actually have a series of 4 questions. 2 of those questions are quantitative, like polling questions, and the other ones are qualitative, where it takes some time to respond. Bruce and I have been chatting back and forth while during this rounds. We've decided to not do those. We did it for the other 2 rounds this week. We're not going to do it for this rounds. This conversation doesn't need to get distracted. So my ask of participants, panelists, and Carol, next week, we anticipate we will be crowding your inbox with another email, but this one is like really critical. When I say it's critical, it's like after 80X rounds with 35,000 participants, what is the future for doing these? And so your input on that email and those responses are going to be really helpful, okay? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists for any last comment. So let's see, who's Dan, last comment, and then Dave, Harry, Dave Thompson.
Carol, great presentation. I'm sending you a hug through the internet. And, we really need to do a better job when we bring people into the profession, whether it is medicine, nursing, EMS, on how to take care of themselves mentally. And then for these large scale incidents, especially for one as challenging as COVID, what do we do? Right? What are the long-term solutions? Not those short-term CISD teams, et cetera, but what are the long-term solutions that we need to help people moving forward in the future? And Carol, again, great job. Thank you.
And Dan, you actually touched on, came close to one of the comments that's in the chat about the individual approaches are likely not sufficient for this. There need to be some systematic issues that need to be addressed for sure. And I'm absolutely on board with that. So yeah.
It's like trauma. It's like cardiac. It's the system of care.
Well said.
And that's the approach.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, Dave Gerson.
So you asked if these fill a need, and they do. And a few times you have paused them. You said to give people a stress break and take one thing off their schedule, and I get that. But I got to tell you, for many of us, and I've talked to some of the other people who are participants, and I've been on these both as a panelist and as a participant, this is a stress break. I learn from these. I enjoy these. The conversations are wonderful. The conversations in the chat are terrific. This has tremendous value. And I do a lot of continuing education. There are very few Con Ed sessions that I look forward to. I look forward to these. Yes, they serve a need, Rick. Keep them going.
Thanks, David. Very kind. Harry.
First, Carol, I love you. Dave, those were incredible comments. I just want to say the one thing I've had so many comments I wanted to say and I've held back. Be good to each other. What stresses one person, what is a critical incident of one person may be nothing to you or to me, and recognize that we don't all respond the same. I was bumped off an aircraft that crashed and killed 4 of my friends. And every time there's an air medical accident, it gets to me. So that's stressful to me, where a number of other things, I can blow right past that. So just be good to each other, recognize when your friend or your partner is having an issue and reach out like Carol did. I think that is an incredible example. Thank you.
Thanks. And Harry, as you said that, the one thing I do actually personally find of great value on these rounds, particularly, I'm looking at the chat just like you are in the QA and trying to listen all at the same time, but people are good to each other on these rounds. And that's a good feeling. So anyway, Dave Thompson.
Yeah, I think what we have to start doing is taking time. And we run a code. It's stressful. The person doesn't make it. So often we just go, oh, okay, we're on to the next thing, and we don't take time. The same is true. Almost all of us have turnover of some sort at the end of our shift. And so often it's just like, oh, I got this, and this, and these are the tasks that I need you to pick up for me, instead of taking some time to talk to each other. How was your shift? And listen to what the person has to say. And I think if we start taking time with each other, it's going to go a long way to helping.
Hey, Dave, yeah, how many times you and I switch shift together, but it strikes me that like what happens right after that checkout, that period of time is probably a whole lot more critical than just the checkout, like the clinical stuff alone. And I don't think anybody's ever really paid attention to that before, like you're suggesting. So great comment. Okay, Carol, I got one question for you. And then any last comments from you? The question is, yeah, we were talking, in the green room before actually, I don't, that's the best, Bruce, I don't have a better name for it, but in the 11:30 to noon, when we try to get all the logistics sorted out, make sure we slide share and all that stuff, we were talking about how difficult it was for you to put the slides together. Tell me, okay, when you were putting them together, what piece was like, this is impossible, I just can't do this part, and what part of the slides was the most difficult? Because I think that may uncover some stuff that might be really helpful.
I think the title slide was, which kind of goes to my my comments, probably closing comments, is the fact that we're not capturing how many people are committing suicide due to COVID-19 pandemic. My colleague, the only clue, he expressed multiple times overwhelming fear of infecting his family, to the point where he abruptly left work, called 4 times to make sure the beneficiaries on his policies were in line, and that's it. And how do you capture that? We talk about COVID, people dying from COVID. We talk about people dying from complications of COVID. Is this a complication of COVID in my heart? Yeah, it is. But guess what? The death certificate says suicide.
Suicide, yeah.
There's nothing about COVID on there.
Yeah.
And so I look at my colleague and I look at Tony Davis, my EMS provider who passed away from COVID. And they're like mirror images. These people gave their lives to the community. These people in their careers saved countless lives. Both of them died alone. They both died alone. Neither one of them deserved to die alone. One was a statistic that's recorded that to me is, I don't even want to call him a statistic. He's my friend. The other one is a statistic of our system that isn't even recognized as a statistic of this pandemic. That's the crime here.
Carol, thanks. Just before we close out, any comment from you before I thank all?
I saw.
Oh yeah, Carol.
Yeah, they wanted to know get my diagnosis.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll end on a high note. I'm a gammophobic artophilus. Artophilus is a psychiatric diagnosis for a lover of teddy bears, and I have teddy bears everywhere in my house. And you'll see if you read the article, Maynard's my favorite teddy bear, and oftentimes the most sane entity that I talk to in a day. And gammophobia, everybody has a phobia. Gammophobia is the extreme fear of marriage. So I just panic at weddings and things like that. And I don't know, I probably need conscious sedation to walk down an aisle. So but Maynard keeps me company, so it's all good.
Carol, thanks very much. And to our participants and panelists and echo Carol, y'all do me a favor, just stay human.
Yep.
We'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.